We turn now to the ranking member, Mr. King, for his 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. As I've listened to the testimony here, I've accumulated a whole list of things that need to be rebutted, and not the least of which is the minimum wage position. It's pretty interesting to me to hear the testimony of Mr. Glaze that he pays his workers $93 a day for 9 hours work. That works out to be $10.33 an hour. And to hear Ms. Sanchez say that there are not laws that apply to ag workers, and it's true to some degree, and we need to just increase the minimum wage so that we can increase the wages to farm workers and be accused of being, let me say, inconsistent with the rationale. But I think the evidence is right here before us. If Mr. Glaze is paying what he says, and I absolutely believe him, and the minimum wage in the United States is currently $7.25 an hour, there must be a reason Mr. Glaze pays more than the minimum wage, and that's called supply and demand, as I've heard some of the witnesses reference, and I'm sure Dr. Swain would address that within that context. I have said labor is a commodity. I spent a lot of time as labor. I think more time as labor than anybody else on this panel, and it's always been supply and demand. And I've looked at the people that competed against me for those jobs, and I've known that I had to do a better job and show up on time and produce more work per hour, or somebody was going to be looking over my shoulder to take that job. And I started on the pipeline in the construction business, but those workers that dug ditch by hand, and if they got tired and couldn't dig, excuse me, and they had to stop and rest on the shovel, somebody was sitting on the dirt pile to come down and take the shovel out of their hand. These were Americans lined up to take jobs. The back of the line piece of this, Mr. Rodriguez's testimony that they would go to the back of the line, and I think it's important that we understand where that line is. If you look at the lines in each of the countries where people have lined up to legally apply to come to America, and I have great respect for those who want to achieve the American dream. But that line is about 50 million long if you add up the accumulated visas out there in the various varieties that we have. And the waiting period of time from Mexico, I don't know that I can speak to that factually, but we know that is several years, and it might be 7 or 8 or 9 years. And it's about that period of time even to bring in a family member from, let's say, a foreign country. So the back of the line, if we're going to talk about the back of the line, it's behind the 50 million. It's not in front of the 50 million. And then I often hear the statement that they would, within the context of the broader version of comprehensive immigration reform, that they would learn English and pay a fine. And the fine started out at $500 and went to $750 and then perhaps $1,500. Learning English is not a penalty. It is a good thing. Wherever in the world you have English, you can go anywhere in the world and get a job. So I'd say that's a benefit to do that. The 72-hour rule, yes, it exists, but think about this subject is not specifically addressed here in this testimony. This subject that we're talking about is the rule of law. And the 72-hour rule says Mr. Lundgren has 10 seconds to know that a bill is coming up because the rule is waived or ignored or not respected. When we don't respect the rule of law, that's the product that we get. And so I will say the central argument is an essential pillar of American exceptionalism, the rule of law. And we're trying to figure out how to reconcile it after it's been ignored for so long. And I look back at perhaps Dwight Eisenhower was the last president to advance an administration that strictly enforced immigration law. And it's diminished under each administration since that period of time. And we had a good program in the Bracero program. But the 86 Amnesty Act said this will be the last amnesty ever. The last amnesty ever. And I remember Ronald Reagan at least was honest, and he said, I'm signing the amnesty bill, but we're going to enforce immigration law. And I believed him. And I still have those records that I kept with the applicants that came in on their I-9 forms. But nobody ever showed up to look at those documents, and the enforcement diminished administration after administration. And now there's been bred a contempt for the rule of law, and we're here with a debate before this panel that seems to argue that we should just simply disregard all the law breaking that's gone on because we haven't enforced the law, and now the argument that I've heard is we can't enforce the law. Well, we can, we must reestablish the rule of law, and I don't suggest that we go out and chase people down and round them up and put them in train cars to go back to their home country. I suggest that we enforce the law at the local level with cooperation of local law enforcement officials in the spirit of the 287G program. I suggest that we look to each other, our neighbors, and understand that if there's someone standing on the line on the clock being paid and they're unlawfully working in the United States, then they're taking a job that a legal worker can do, whether they're a legal immigrant or whether they're an illegal immigrant. And this country has an oversupply of underskilled labor. That's why the people that grow up around me that decided they didn't want to go on and get a higher education can no longer punch the clock and make the same money that an educated high school teacher does. It's half the money in my neighborhood. And I would just conclude as I watch the gavel start to move here, rather than ask a question, I'll just make this point. I watched Mr. Colbert. I did finally watch you. I saw the video. I watched you picking beans, and I believe you did. And I also watched you said packing corn, but I was watching you unpack corn. And I know you don't do that out there on the cornfield. It gets packed into the crate and gets shipped out here. So I'm just going to presume they ran the film backwards. You were making productive work, and I'd conclude my statement and yield back the balance of my time.